Welcome to the AT Innovation and Impact podcast, where we dive deep into the innovations transforming lives through assistive technology. I'm Mariam Bandugda. This podcast is brought to you by the Global Disability Innovation Hub's flagship AT 2030 program, which is funded by the UK Aid. Today, we are joined by Bernard Chiira, the co-founder of Innovate Now. Bernard, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mariam.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I'll start with the basic question around Innovate Now. What is the story of Innovate Now? Where did the idea or the vision for Innovate Now come from?
Yeah, thank you. So the story of Innovate Now is actually an interesting one, and it goes all the way back to 2019. And I was at the time working in Strathmore University, where I was leading IBIS Africa, which is the incubator there. And I used to, of course, being an incubator, I was very external facing, welcoming many guests all the time. So one day, Catherine Holloway walks into my office and she tells me that she's here to see what's happening on the entrepreneurship and innovation side then. And then we started talking. And then when we were talking, and she was with her colleague, by the way, trying to remember the name, it will come to me. And then she started saying that there's a big project coming, and it's on assistive technology. And the whole idea was to reduce the gap or like increase access to AT. And that there were some considerations to test innovation in Kenya. And we started talking about that, and two words just jumped at me, and those words are disability innovation. Now, a little bit about myself. I do have a disability, a physical disability. Since I was born, I have brittle bone disease and scoliosis. So I do have the lived experience of someone with a disability growing up in Kenya, a typical African country. And I was actually born in the village, on the village side, in the central part of Kenya, called Nyeri. And my experience, just trying to achieve the regular milestones that any child goes through is very similar to that of many people with disabilities, because the way society is designed, ideas around accessibility and inclusion are not part of the larger design of the society as we know it today and even then. So it was very hard for me to get access to healthcare, for example, for the condition that I had. And across other areas like access to education also was very difficult. But I was blessed to go through all those stages and to end up at the apex of my career, running an innovation space, an incubator for one of the leading universities. So when they told me disability innovation, it kind of made sense, because it was about how do you bring new ideas into a space that has been traditionally been overlooked, even by the innovators or the investors. It's not an area that has been known for innovation. So anyway, I learned more about where this was coming from, and I learned it was being supported by the AT 2030 project, and it was a massive project doing many things, but innovation was one of the areas they wanted to test. How could you enable access to AT in a country like Kenya by allowing entrepreneurs to start thinking about solving some of the challenges in AT? And they came with a concept note. They asked me for a lot of feedback questions, and we had a back and forth between, actually this was December of 2018, and we talked all through February when they came back again. And this time round, they had clarity what they wanted, and they asked me, do you want to be the director of Innovate Now to help us launch this in Kenya? And I said yes. And the journey began. I remember we had a soft launch first, and this was at University of Nairobi during the Nairobi Innovation Week,
Oh, okay.
because I think the idea was to quickly start and test this within the shortest time possible. So the original idea about Innovate Now was actually to set up a hub, a physical space, like where we are here now in Senses Hub, where you can support entrepreneurs who are building assistive technologies. But for a number of reasons, we decided to take a different approach, and that is to go programmatic. So say, look for partners and run Innovate Now as a program, and quickly be able to start supporting entrepreneurs without necessarily investing in physical space. Not that the physical space was not needed at that time, but we thought we could leverage on what already existed. I mean, a little bit about Nairobi. It's probably one of Africa's leading tech and innovation hubs. There's many innovation hubs in Kenya, incubators, accelerators, and many of them are already supporting entrepreneurs. It's just that nobody was specifically looking out for disability innovators. And this was, how do we change that? How do we influence that? So the big moonshot or hypothesis around Innovate Now was to test what works and helping 80 entrepreneurs go through something called the Startup Valley of Death.
Right.
Just to explain that a little bit is, when you think about innovation, especially where the concept is to start with an idea, test that idea, engage in a lot of R&D, validate that the product or solution works, especially for persons with disabilities. It's a stage where it's very hard or difficult to get the resources that are needed. There is not enough R&D. Even now, 5 years later, after launching Innovate Now, that is going to support early stage entrepreneurs. So there was this big question. We know innovation can make a difference. It probably is a radical approach to trying to close the gap of access to assistive technology. But how do you actually do it? And Innovate Now, at that point, was to test that. So we had a soft launch at University of Nairobi. And I remember when I left Strathmore, I was a one-man team, and we had a concept. But we knew we could leverage on the friendship and partnerships that we had created, the network that I had, the partnerships that GDI have had. And I remember the next big kind of like momentum towards that was when we went to Kigali. So GSMA was hosting an event in Kigali in 2019, I think. Trying to remember the month, I can't quite, but probably maybe June or August. And it was the GSMA 360, Mobile 360. Right. And somehow we got a slot to speak about this project on stage. And it was a massive opportunity because there were many international and African guests, organizations coming for this. And yeah, I went to Kigali at their very beautiful convention center. And I remember when I was being mic'd, ready to go on this big stage, and somebody asked me, "Are you ready for this?" And I said, "Yes." And when I went on stage, it was a bit of a keynote, but also a presentation, just to explain what is this, why is it needed, and what do we need, what do we want. And I remember after I did that presentation, one of the journalists that was covering the event is Larry Madawo. He's probably one of Kenya's most famous journalists. Right now, I think he's with CNN or BBC. Right. I can't remember which. But then he came up and said, I was really intrigued by what you said. Can we do an interview? He was working for BBC then, and we did an interview. and I spoke about this as the first accelerator, probably amongst the first in the world, but it was surely the first in Africa. And I explained why we were doing this, what we were going to offer the innovators, and this got broadcasted, I think, globally on BBC, which made a massive bang in terms of the launch. And then we started receiving so many applications after that. And I remember we got actually applicants from 6 countries across the world. Kenya, Tanzania, Belgium, the US. I think the world was kind of really waiting for something like this. It's what we were discovering. And I think it was the early days of the validation that this could be something that is needed, because what we didn't know and what we couldn't have predicted was, would we get entrepreneurs who are already building assistive technology solutions, from a market-driven perspective, that wanted to build a business. And one of the conditions we had put in our call for applications was that you had to be doing this for emerging markets in Africa. So even if you're from the US, we're supporting you to come and address the needs here. And so cohort 1 was, I guess, a very significant one for us. I remember when we had the official onboarding of the first cohort, we ended up selecting 5 companies that I still think about even up to now, because while it was not the intention to take only African focused or African founders, somehow the selection process produced all African founders and they were all Kenyan founders.
Wow.
That time the partnership on Innovate Now was between GDI Hub, Amref Health Africa, and myself. So I've just joined as the co-founding director. And the role of Amref was to host Innovate Now, because remember we had changed tact into being a program. And so we leveraged on that partnership to be able to operationalize activities very quickly. And we were an in-person accelerator, so you had to come and go through our process. So when we launched, the idea was we had a curricula around how do you actually do AT entrepreneurship. And then the other form of support was getting mentors who could support these entrepreneurs. And then it was designed towards a demo day where after 3 months, you'd get an opportunity to pitch to a curated audience that would bring in, the people who we thought would support these startups going forward. And so cohort 1 ended up becoming 5 startups. And that was Hope Tech, Sina, Lencell Technologies. We had a company called Vision Vijana, who are in the eye glasses space. And we had another startup called Toto Sai or something like this. They were building like a smart cane. And to be honest, cohort 1 was also like the biggest experiment of this, because it was the first time we were doing it. So we were learning a lot about, is our method effective? What do we need to change? And we learned a lot. And when demo day came for cohort 1, obviously it was a big moment for us to see what was the impact of the program. And for the first cohort, we actually had a grant, a 20K grant that would go to the best startup, which is always very difficult to do, because at the very soul of a startup is the founder. So what you're really doing is betting on a founder. And to be honest, they were all amazing. amazing founders. I think up to this day, we are in touch, and some of them have grown in leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
And the journey continued, so we started running more cohorts. And along the way, we were also doing a study, or there was a researcher, I think it's Dr. Emma Smith,
Yes.
who was helping us to kind of continuously, compare or have a study on what are the needs of these entrepreneurs, how are these needs met, after, during the program. And I would say, because 80-20-30 is a very evidence-driven kind of project, because it wants to bet on the best approaches. So everything we did was documented. There's research about it.
Yeah.
In fact, even before Innovate Now was launched, there were a few scoping reports done. I think there is I forget the name of the report, but there is an ecosystem study
Right.
that outlined why we're setting up Innovate Now. And it's been trying to validate our early assumptions as we go along the way. And so I would say Innovate Now has evolved into different phases, or it has gone through a sort of evolution, let me say that.
Yeah.
And I would say phase one was between 2019 and 2021.
Okay.
And this was during the what works season,
Yeah.
if I may call it that. That was, responding to the 80-20-30, hypothesis. Do we need 80 accelerators? Can they work? And I think the biggest lessons that came out of this first phase were, first of all, some sort of validation. We were able to find startups who were already, even before we set up,
Yeah.
who were already building assistive tech. Then the demand for support was there. The gaps around AT entrepreneurship were there. We were able to validate that. Some of the founders really benefited from going through the education because they were not necessarily coming from a business background
Right.
or an innovation-driven entrepreneurship background, because there's a difference. Entrepreneurship is broad.
Right.
And it also helps us to start understanding some of the dynamics of launching an AT startups in a market like Kenya. So there were a lot of learnings.
Yeah.
And some of, and you can stop me if you want to ask another question.
I do. But
Yeah.
please, I'll let you finish.
Some of the, I would say, early learnings that I personally took is that programs that support entrepreneurs and innovators, they actually need to be very holistic, in the sense that entrepreneurs, first of all, they're not only solving a problem,
Yeah.
they are also trying to build a business. And the needs of that include, yes, education, yes, mentoring, but there is also resources. For example, if you're building a hardware product,
Yeah.
where will you do your prototyping? Where will you actually get the talent, the engineering talent to do certain things? How are you going to build a team? How are you going to recruit talent to complement you as a founder?
Yeah.
And lastly, how are you going to fund this operation? And there were key learnings around those points that have informed the evolution of Innovate Now.
Yeah. What an incredible journey it has been. And to think of it, it hasn't been that long, has it?
No.
And we actually lost almost 2 years during COVID time. So I would love to know how did you manage that time? But I think Innovate Now, true to its name, it is truly innovative, isn't it? That bootstrapping and testing as you go along, and iterating and improving and innovating. So that's really incredible to hear, and the tremendous success of the program so far. So I would also like to, I mean, incredible achievements, right? But I would also like to know the challenges that you experience as an innovator yourself, but also running this program in Africa, especially when the grounds were not entirely fertile for something like this. So could you talk us through some of the challenges that you
Yeah,
experienced?
absolutely. So first of all, my background is I have a computer science and business background by training, and I also specialize in new venture creation and also venture capital. So I've been in the space for, I guess, more than a decade now, and had worked with many startups before I came to Innovate Now. So I kind of was already in the ecosystem, so to speak, and understood the culture of innovation. So one of the challenges I faced earlier on is it was more of like structural, because we all know that innovation requires you to be very agile,
Right.
to be very flexible, to be very to actually be to deal with risk a little bit differently from everybody else, to have a little bit of appetite for risk. Now, while that is really required to be an entrepreneur, the dynamics of innovating in the disability space somehow required us also to be very cognizant to certain limitations. First of all is the process that an AT startup goes through before they can actually launch a product that is approved or accepted into the market is sometimes accompanied by certain challenges around regulatory challenges, for example. You might have long cycles of clinical trials. You might have all these dynamics. So that was new to me, because mostly in my previous career or area of work in the mainstream startup ecosystem, most of the startups we had were more on the digital side of things,
Right.
software side of things, where it's very easy to move quickly. So that's number one. Then number two was this project would be implemented inside, or rather embedded in, an existing organization.
Okay.
So usually that is supposed to work if the organization is accustomed to like innovation, disability, and things like that. So I remember when we were making these considerations, we couldn't answer all questions, and we had to quickly settle and start implementing. So we were gonna implement Innovate Now inside an NGO,
Right.
because AMREF is an NGO, public health NGO, probably one of the best we have on the continent, and it's a huge organization. So one of my expectations was that it'd be very easy to like get certain approvals done. You know, I was used to a very lean structure,
Right.
but then this was a challenge because it's a new organization, different layers of, so a little bit of bureaucracy there. And so it's learning how to make that work.
Yeah.
And then learning, just still talking about the structural challenges, is also learning how to coordinate between a partner based in the global north, so GDI Hub in UCL, AMREF in Kenya, government. So all this needed an efficient level of coordination. And my role as director was not just like programmatic, making sure that the accelerator runs. It's also what's the strategic alignment that we can have so that this work becomes really impactful. So it was not very easy to do that, but somehow we managed. And I remember also we had to really question the curriculum itself, because
Right.
in our first cohort, we did a bespoke. I would say, okay, no, it wasn't a bespoke. It was, I would say, uh, maybe a more broader sense. It was a curriculum that was not customized for
Right.
AT entrepreneurship. So we realized that we needed to adapt and build a curriculum that contextualizes some of the realities and dynamics of the AT space, like some of the issues I mentioned. How do you navigate regulatory environments that are highly regulated? Because when it comes to AT, there's a very huge legacy or still big connection even up to date with the medical world.
Yeah.
And it's guided by the doctor's code of ethics, do no harm. So you can't really afford to just take a product to
Yeah.
a person with disability if it hasn't gone through. So, so this, I mean, we needed to help entrepreneurs appreciate these dynamics and also know how to navigate
Yeah.
that space. And so we had to build a curriculum. By cohort 2, we needed a curriculum that would respond to the needs
Yeah.
of AT entrepreneurs. And then we also realized that, look, when it comes to innovation, there's a lot of tools and methods. And what you want to do is equip an entrepreneur with the knowledge of how to use these different tools
Yeah.
to solve different problems. So part of what we also thought we could do is to build like a toolbox,
Right.
which was really like a group of innovation methods. And the idea was to make it very easy to teach the entrepreneur where they can find it, how they can learn how to use the tool, and which problem they can use
Right.
the tool to solve. And this was across business modeling, product development, ideation. So we developed a number of resources in this first phase of Innovate Now. And the idea was we're going to do this under an open source license, because one of the things about the Innovation Now model is it was actually not just an accelerator, it was also an inclusive innovation ecosystem.
Right.
And it was also supposed to help us test something that can be scaled or replicated or applied in different markets in terms of supporting entrepreneurs. So, of course, I would say it was not easy to build these resources while at the same time supporting entrepreneurs, but we had to because it was needed, and I think we succeeded in that regard. We built our development series, Inclusive Innovation Curriculum,
Right.
and it was published under an open source attribution license, and it covers product, market, business, and user development. It's broken into those themes, and then it has level 1, which we call 101, and level 2, which is called 201. And the design of this curriculum was that it would give an entrepreneur the breadth in terms of learning, but it was not necessarily designed for depth into making them, say, an expert in products.
Yeah.
And there was an aspect or an expectation that these entrepreneurs were coming with a certain level of knowledge, or they would need to invest their own time to go deeper. Because we knew that we needed also to attract innovators who had these qualities. Otherwise, it would turn into being a school and not really a.
Yeah.
So that's how the curriculum was designed. And even though it was challenging, we managed to do it and start testing it by cohort 2. And the other challenge we faced early on is obviously COVID-19 was something that nobody quite
Yeah.
expected or knew how to deal with.
Yeah.
And when I reflect now on how we approached COVID, it was both a blessing and a curse.
How so?
So it was a curse in the sense that just like how everybody else was affected, we were also affected. We couldn't hold in-person activities, and we were an in-person
Yeah.
accelerator. And we also knew that we couldn't stop this because it was very important for us to test and validate certain things. One thing I want to say is that the first phase of Innovate Now had very ambitious targets.
Right.
The target was to launch 100 new startups in 3 years.
Wow, that is ambitious.
So when COVID came, I was like, obviously this is could potentially set us back, and so we actually, instead of like stopping activities, we evolved. We became an online first accelerator. So we never lost time. Actually, we were running cohorts.
So you were recruiting new cohorts as well?
Yes, during COVID.
Nice.
But then the model had changed. We needed to learn very quickly.
Yeah.
How do you support entrepreneurs effectively online? Also taking cognizant that you also need to do it in a very accessible manner.
Yeah.
One of the things about Innovate Now, while it's not only for founders who have disabilities,
Yeah.
it is very much so for them and everybody else who is interested in addressing assistive
Yeah.
technology challenges. So we learned, I remember we actually at some point subscribed to a platform because we thought, okay, what technologies are used here?
Yeah. Like a learning management system.
Yeah, like we started looking out for solutions, and I remember we subscribed to one called Babel or something like this.
Okay. Yeah.
But our experience was actually that sometimes you think that people will utilize technology if you just show them how to use it
Yeah.
and give it to them. But we actually realized that our entrepreneurs were not really using the platform the way we thought they would. And we also noticed they were preferring using WhatsApp. Like, and we
Yeah.
needed this because we needed to coordinate a lot of activities since you're not meeting physically. And it was a key learning about technology and also for us, like, maybe the answer is not a very specialized technology sometimes. You just need to take something that's already working.
really.
And people that, WhatsApp sounds
Yeah.
simple, but we realized that people are preferring that. And
Yeah.
so we abandoned the license for that platform and we focused more on, okay, let's use WhatsApp. And then at some point we actually moved on to Slack,
Right.
which worked quite well actually. And this is how we survived running, during COVID. Of course, there were challenges because the in-person experience has certain elements that you cannot replicate online. I can tell more about you by seeing you also or interacting, and so of course that was taken away. And then one other unique approach for Innovate Now is co-creation and testing with persons with disabilities.
Yeah.
And this was not very practical online. So it was affected in that sense. We had to pause our live lab activities until it was allowed
Right.
by the authorities to meet in person. And so what we did is try to do that within the allowable, group sizes and things like this. So it was a challenging time, but it was a great time to learn. And then one other thing that, now moving to like the blessing side of things, is that we realized that, okay, if we are online first, then we can actually allow entrepreneurs who are in other countries, doesn't matter where they are,
Yeah.
as long as they qualify, they can participate. And this was an inflection point in terms of the diversity of entrepreneurs and founders that started joining Innovate Now from cohort 3, cohort
3.
4.
Okay.
Because now we could have entrepreneurs from Nigeria, from other countries. And the good thing about this, then it allowed us to reach far and wide.
Yeah.
And we decided that, we're going to keep it like that. We will not only admit entrepreneurs from East Africa, but keep it wide and open. And that allowed us to grow in terms of presence. Our entrepreneurs now come from 11 countries. We have 9 countries in Africa out of that 11.
Wow.
And they are all distributed from all regions. We have Southern Africa, Northern Africa, Western Africa, and Eastern Africa.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Again, that spirit of innovation persists throughout the COVID period, where you're adapting and learning as you go and testing as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned about testing and co-creation in person with potential AT users. So could you tell us a little bit more about how Innovate Now empowers, I guess, innovators to co-create, and how does that partnership work with the AT users?
Yeah. So before I answer that, I want to say there was another significant challenge that came, which also really tested our resilience. And it was generally around funding.
Yeah.
Because what happened during the COVID period, and I wouldn't blame anybody because COVID was a new thing that nobody knew how to deal with. So most donors started scaling down on activities, allocating budget lines to deal with COVID. And we were funded by the UK government.
Yeah.
So, and also I think just before COVID, I think there was a major change in the development finance in the UK.
Right.
So what used to be DFID was restructured and it became, or it was joined with FCDO.
Yeah.
There was a new prime minister who came with new rules, I guess.
Yeah.
And that had an impact, of course, on all like UK aid funded project, not just us. So we had to kind of figure that one out and start thinking about what can you do to keep it going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can come back to that later if you want, but I will move to your question.
I'm quite interested. I think let's continue with that and we can discuss the user side of things.
Yeah.
So clearly, especially when it comes to funding, it's really important to have a sustainable source of funding. And that means that sometimes you might need to seek multiple sources of funding, as you said. Sometimes governments change, policies change, which means that priorities will change and hence the funding may or may not be available.
Yeah.
So how have you adapted to those challenges and how has Innovate Now been able to sustain itself and how do you envision for the future?
Yeah. So one thing I can say about funding in the innovation space especially, first of all, relying on one source of funding is obviously risky just because of the things you highlighted. And in our case, since it was a policy change that affected everybody, there was no way of making like a counterclaim or saying, oh, but we are the first AT accelerator, don't cut our budget. we couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I had to again look at what can I do in this situation. Being a leader, I'm the project director, and also being somebody who really believed in this idea that it needed to be done, and also having this big vision that we can actually build something bigger than this project. So
Yeah.
we obviously had to go into fundraising mode immediately, at least for myself.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult for GDI Hub and also AMREF, because for AMREF, the only way they could implement this program was because of the funding they were getting
Yeah.
to implement it. They were a local implementing partner. So it was not necessarily already in their
Right.
strategic plans, in their funding plans.
Yeah.
So we did try. I had great support from, her name is Caroline. She was the CEO then of AMREF Health Enterprises. And we started pitching this internally to ask AMREF as an organization to invest in it, or to consider making it part of their. And I obviously also tried to ask GDI Hub to do the same. But remember, GDI Hub at that point was single-handedly funded
Yes.
by, so they were in the same problem.
Yeah.
So what happened is, I remember that back in September of 2019, around the time I had just joined Innovate Now, still new. So I still had some activities from my previous work
Right.
that had to be completed. And one of them was a trip to Norway. And I went for this trip. It was a kind of like innovation exchange between Norway and Kenya.
Right.
And the context of this was just before I left Strathmore. I had worked with other innovation ecosystem intermediaries in Kenya to create a platform, or a network that would bring intermediaries together to define some ecosystem objectives that could help everybody
Right.
support entrepreneurs better in the country. And I was elected to be the first chairman of this organization. It's called ASEC, which is the Association of Startup and SME Enablers of Kenya. And at that time, we were really, we had a really good friendship with a Norwegian organization called Pangea Accelerator,
Right.
that I had hosted at Strathmore when they came to the Kenyan market. The CEO is a gentleman called Jonas, who helped bridge that, or catalyze the relationship between Norway and Kenya. So we reached out to the Norwegian Embassy, to Norwegian organizations like ICT Norway, and we organized a trip to take like a delegation of Kenyan startups, a few incubators, to Norway for the Oslo Innovation Week.
Right.
And I was leading this delegation. And when I met with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway, that supports Norway's development agenda in developing countries, obviously they were impressed by that, but they were very curious
Yeah.
on what is my day job.
Yeah.
Why am I a member and chairman of this organization? And so I told them that I had just left Strathmore, and I'm now the director of a new project, Africa's First AT Accelerator. And I told them we are actually not the typical DPO, because they had before funded a lot of organizations or persons
Yeah.
with disabilities, but they never heard of anything like this. So they were curious, and they were like, who's funding it? How can we get involved? But I was at that time under, I wouldn't say strict instructions, but some caution that since UK Aid had just funded Innovate Now,
Yeah.
it was probably immature to start talking to other funders about coming in, and so I had to manage it very strategically.
Yeah.
And of course, I told them that we have just started this, we are testing it, we want to grow it,
Yeah.
and we will keep our channels open, and maybe we can test something small in the meantime.
Yeah.
And I remember the idea at that time was to do maybe a few events with the embassy
Right.
here in Kenya to create more awareness around disability innovation, just to test what a collaboration would look like.
Right.
But that was in September of 2019.
Oh, wow.
So we actually never got to doing the pilot. And it was only until we got this way into the, I think, second or third quarter of Innovate Now, after we got this news that there would be funding cuts, I just remembered, wait a minute, I was in Norway in 2019 and they seemed very interested. So I'm going to go back to them and ask them,
Yeah.
this is our situation, this is what we've done. Would you be interested in helping us make sure that the program continues? And luckily, I remember the person at the Norwegian Agency for Development was familiar with Strathmore University and what was happening there before. So I was not very new to them in that. So there was a little bit of confidence. But of course, there had to be a lot of due diligence. And there was also like, and remember, this was a conversation that was happening in June of 2019, that we needed to close before the end of the year.
Right.
And somehow we managed to do it, to put in a proposal. We pulled in everybody to write a proposal on what we're going to do to extend Innovate Now.
Yeah.
And the concept was, first of all, we would look at the intersection of digital and assistive technology. And then we would look at how do you support alumni
Yeah.
who have already gone through the program to attract investment, and how does also Innovate Now attract more partners, more funders,
Yeah.
so that we don't find ourselves in the situation we were in the beginning. So this was a kind of like the spirit of this new
Yeah.
phase of Innovate Now, which I would call phase 2.
Right.
And I remember when we were actually holding our breath, because Norway was also going through a government change in November, December of 2020, of 2021. So we were not sure whether the application or the would be accepted by the new, but luckily it was, and it got accepted during a very difficult time, because this was on the onset of COVID,
Yeah.
December 2019. So many projects actually that had applied to Norad were not funded because of things like COVID. So we were lucky in a sense,
Yeah.
or blessed in a sense. So it got approved, and we knew that from January we would have some budget to run a new phase of the program
Yeah.
for 3 years, and they call it the new wave of momentum. I remember when we were kind of doing the press release, and we did also an event during the Global Disability Summit.
Yeah.
I think it was the second one that was hosted in Norway.
Right.
So I joined from Kenya actually, but we launched it. The support was amazing, because the State Secretary of Norway did a video about this project. It's still on our website, which was amazing support and confidence that this is needed. It's going to create jobs. It's going to have impact in the lives of people with disabilities, and it's going to extend the great work that 80-20-30 had started. And this has allowed us to run 3 more cohorts. So cohort 5, 6, and 7,
Right.
doubling our portfolio of companies from 22 to 45, and allowing us to continue supporting all the alumni of Innovate Now from cohort 1 in terms of investor readiness and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And again, as you said, that very resilient as well, because you have to keep changing with times and find different sources of funding. And I guess that's a lesson for the innovators that you train as well. That it's important to be open, flexible, and adaptive to the changes around us. I find what really interesting also is that the view of AT innovation as a sort of an ecosystem or systematic view of things, that it's not just about the innovators or the innovations, it's about the whole system that goes along with it, whether that's job creation and also sourcing of materials, space, etc. And one of the core components is the user, right?
Yeah.
So one of the core values of Innovate Now is co-creation and early testing and iteration and being agile, as you said. So how does that work? How do you involve the users in co-creation, and how do you adapt to the feedback?
Yeah. So there's a famous saying now in the disability movement space: nothing about us without us. And I hear it's also evolving to just nothing without us, or something like that. Nothing without us. So from the beginning, this was the design or the spirit of innovating with persons with disabilities. So much so that the director himself had to be someone with a disability, with lived experience.
Yeah.
So the Live Labs component of Innovate Now is where the co-creation happens. And the way it was envisioned, Live Labs was basically virtual or physical spaces that create proximity, access, and collaboration with persons with disabilities, and allow the innovators to co-create with them. And the way we designed it is that for every cohort we ran, each startup had to validate or go through the Live Labs process based on the target group of people with disabilities they were innovating with and for. And the way we achieved this was through partnership by an amazing organization called Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa that have been consistent from our first phase up to now in terms of delivering Live Labs.
Yeah.
And the way they do this is they support us to reach out to communities of persons with disabilities and to support the research and validation process for each startup in terms of how do they conduct the user testing, how do they find the right people to test the innovations. And so from cohort 1 all the way to cohort 7, this has been a key feature or part of Innovate Now, to the extent that some of the participants of Live Labs have become part of the inclusive innovation community. And some of them have actually started working closely either with the startups or want to start a startup themselves. So there's a community emerging from there. And one thing I can say about product testing or co-creation with the disability community, it provides something that nobody else can give you. And it is like getting access to the people that will determine whether your product will sell or not. And this is a principle actually followed as well in the innovation process, in the mainstream innovation process. It's not necessarily new. It's actually part of the design thinking approach, for example. You always have to put the user at the center, so to speak. And this is what we do with Life Labs.
Yeah.
And it has informed significantly the evolution of the different ideas that these innovators came with.
Yeah.
And it has shaped how these products have evolved and eventually gone to market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And especially having that contextual knowledge is extremely important. And Innovate Now being based in Africa, for example, creating technologies for Africa, testing with disabled people, people with disabilities from Africa. I
Yeah.
think that creates a really, I think, valuable and very interesting combination of things that can contribute to the success of an assistive technology or a venture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about the past quite a bit, and we've talked about how Innovate Now was developed and adapted, and where we are now in 2024. What is the future? What does the future look like? What do you think is in the cards for you? And also, I'm curious to know, the technology from 2019 has changed tremendously, especially with the AI-based technologies now. So where do you see the AT innovation or AT ecosystem in Africa moving towards in the next few years?
Yeah. That's a great question, because it also allows us to delve a little bit later into, or actually right now into, like, why are we going the direction that we are going, and what lessons are we taking with us,
Yeah.
so that the future can be brighter. I would want to say the future is going to be as bright as the lights
Yeah.
making this podcast possible. But it will take some work
Yeah.
to make it that bright. I would say, first of all, it is typical of many donor-funded projects to actually end up as pilots. And one of the things I had as a result of being involved in this amazing journey of creating Innovate Now is that we would not be one of those that will die from pilotitis, if I may call it that.
I like
Happens
that
a
term.
lot.
Yeah.
So then that begets the question, what's the plan?
Yeah.
What's the legacy? And unfortunately, when most donor-funded projects are started, nobody begins with legacy in mind or what's next in mind. So that's something very important to state. And the other one is, when you're looking at the dynamics of how Africa is evolving. First of all, in a general sense, let's look at some numbers in terms of population numbers, basically about future markets, the future of many markets and industries are looking into Africa because of the uniqueness of our young population that is going to be bigger than any other continent
Yeah.
in a couple of years. So the future of labor markets, the future of many companies now want a piece of the opportunities
Yeah.
that these many people will need to have jobs, to have products. And also the continent is coming, I would say, of age in a way, in many different ways, democratically, economically. So you can't ignore that there's a significant opportunity that can be created on this continent. And within that context, when you think about people with disabilities, remember the whole, I guess, thesis behind 80-20-30 was, how do you correct the disproportionate access to AT, where up to 80-90% of people that need AT don't have access to it in the global south. while in the north is like 1 out of 10, as they say. So within that context, and also thinking about we're going to increase in numbers tremendously.
Yeah.
And we're already at probably 1.3 billion people on the continent right now. And you know, there's going to be more people with disabilities
Yeah.
in Africa, probably more than anywhere else in the world, in 2050 and going forward. So in a way, when I think about the future of what we are doing, I also think about it in the context of those realities and say, yes, AT is about enabling
Yeah.
people with disabilities to achieve their full potential. But I want to say actually something that's a bit controversial. AT is not about disability inclusion. AT is actually about building an industry. It's about creating jobs.
Yeah.
It is about serving the needs of everybody, not just those with disabilities.
Yeah.
AT is about economic growth and development. AT is about participation, social participation. In fact, there's a number of studies that have already been done talking about the return on investment
Yeah.
of assistive technology. And they don't use, disability inclusion, human rights. We all know that by now.
Yeah.
What we should be trying to help people understand is that when you look at countries that have neglected this industry for so long,
Yeah.
there are so many opportunities that can be created if we invest in the space. You're going to have more people going into jobs, more people going to schools.
Yeah.
You're going to have more economic participation. So when you think about it from that perspective, then we have to ask ourselves, what are the investments that are needed to unlock that? And who's going to be advocating or calling for these investments to be made?
Yeah.
AT entrepreneurs will not thrive unless the manufacturing sector in general in Africa develops to an extent where you can enable a meaningful level of local manufacturing, which might in turn reduce some barriers in terms of access to AT, like the challenges that come with international trade are around the cost of the product ends up being more expensive because everybody has to take their cut.
Yeah.
And please understand that we're not saying that importation is bad. It's probably going to continue being needed.
Yeah.
But imagine positioning the manufacturing sector for companies that have been doing manufacturing for many decades to come and set up in areas that are viable for manufacturing, training local talent. We have affordable labor actually in Kenya. We have energetic young people who are looking for jobs. So anybody who says, let's invest in the medical technologies or AT sector is going to invest in the ecosystem because now maybe a lot of entrepreneurs can actually get their stuff made in country.
Yeah.
The other investments that I think have to be called for in this sector is how do you unlock the demand for assistive technology? How do you create mechanisms that allow people to purchase or get access to AT? And I would want to say here that government has a huge responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
But it's not the State Department of Social Protection in government that we need to tell these stories. It's the it's the economic advisors or economists.
Yeah.
It's the ministers of trade. It's the president who needs to hear about the opportunity to empower everybody, not just people with disabilities,
Yeah.
to be able to purchase assistive technology, especially through the national healthcare, universal healthcare
Yeah.
that government is already investing in. And that will pull in insurance companies to probably have an appetite to cover AT products
Yeah.
and to cover people with disabilities. Those are some of the investments that could unlock demand.
Yeah.
You also have the idea of when you look at finance in Africa, we've actually leapfrogged in some cases,
Yeah.
as in the case of mobile money. It used to be said that 90% of Africans are unbankable because
Yeah.
if they go to a bank, an international or regional bank, they don't meet the criteria.
Yeah.
But when M-Pesa came to Kenya, the rules of the game changed. And it wasn't about how much do you have the ability to maintain an account that has this amount of
Yeah.
money. It was about how do you enable micropayments?
Yeah.
How do you enable people to actually have ease of access to finance?
Yeah.
I personally believe there's a lot of opportunity to think about enabling everybody to access assistive tech through the infrastructure that has already been built.
Yeah.
And today there are so many financial products that enable things like pay as you go for solar, for many things. So how do we bring those solutions
Yeah.
into unlocking the demand for assistive tech?
Yeah.
And I would also want to say that is an investment not in an accelerator, but in the inclusive innovation
Yeah.
ecosystem. And then the other one is how do you actually finance innovation? Because at the end of the day, these startups
Yeah.
will need capital before they are profitable, before
Yeah.
they are financially viable. So the other investments that can really help, not just AT startups, but also early stage startups in general, is more local venture capital.
Right.
We need to make African countries create an environment for venture capital to thrive.
Yeah.
And when I say venture capital, not VC in general, but anybody who wants to invest in an idea or innovation driven company. And I'm talking about early stage, so it's angel
Yeah.
investing,
Yeah.
it's your pre-seed impact funds. One of the challenges we have is that most venture funds do not domicile in Kenya, for example, because the fiscal policies and laws do not
Yeah.
encourage or are not lucrative enough.
Yeah.
So we need to create a more friendly environment. And whilst we are doing that, we need to advocate for a more inclusive venture capital or impact investing. When you look at that space, many people talk about impact investing.
Yeah.
They talk about women, they talk about jobs, they talk about the environment.
Yeah.
Why are they not talking about people with disabilities?
Yeah.
We could actually drive nearly all of those impact metrics if you invest in people with disabilities. And there's a lot that's needed to educate that community, to advocate with government,
Yeah.
to create a more enabling environment. So when I look at the future of how Innovate Now is going to evolve, it's going to, yes, continue supporting AT entrepreneurs for sure. In fact,
Yeah.
we want to grow Innovate Now as a model across the continent. But we want to have a significant impact
Yeah.
into making the systemic changes, the investments that are needed in the ecosystem itself
Yeah.
to enable this sector to thrive. So because of that, we have begun the process of establishing a Kenyan non-profit and also a venture fund
Right.
that will also be creating a network of early stage investors. So we have set up AT4D.
Right.
AT4D is a legacy of the Innovate Now as a project into an organization.
Yeah.
And the mission really is to build technologies and communities that enable persons with disabilities to thrive.
Right.
We want to extend the work of the Innovate Now project beyond where it is. We want to lead disability innovation in Africa into the future.
Yeah.
And we want to do it with others. We want to grow that together with GDI Hub, but in a more strategic way,
Yeah.
strengthening the partnership,
Yeah.
creating more win-win situations,
Yeah.
addressing bigger problems together. So we see a future where AT entrepreneurs will get full circle support.
Yeah.
We will enable more capital to flow towards founders with disabilities and AT entrepreneurs. We will work to influence the landscape from the aspects that I mentioned so that those investments can be made.
Yeah.
And we will continue being for and with persons with disabilities. And therefore, we need a lot of support. We need a lot of collaboration. We need the Kenyan government to know that Kenya is a pioneer
Yeah.
in AT innovation. And we now have a very serious focused mission. In fact, we actually already have a goal that we want to enable 10 million people to access AT by 2050. And that's through shaping how the landscape will look like. Yeah, so we invite everybody, really. Current partners, new partners, funders. We are building programs that will allow everybody to participate. And we think that it is possible to shift perspectives, to shift mindsets, to shift capital and expertise towards persons with disabilities and the AT community. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and definitely our audience and we are looking forward to hearing more about AT4D in the coming weeks and months. And some of the points that you mentioned around capacity building within the AT community, but also people with disabilities, and the need for that systematic cultural change and of coming together of organizations, that are working on advocacy, and as you said, also the business focus and economical mainstreaming, I guess, of assistive technology. So we start to look at, what is the return on investment, and not just financial or economical, but also looking at intangible, what is the cultural impact of a program or organization like this, and also the assistive technology. So that's also quite key here. We would like to wrap up here. Thank you so much for joining. If you would like to, if anyone would like to learn more about AT4D, where should they go? Do you have a website ready yet?
Yeah, so we have a website up where it's actually being built on the go as well, but we do have. So you can go to at4d.org.
Okay.
And that's AT and then number 4 and then G.
Okay.
And you can reach out on email as well, info@at4d.org. You can also reach directly to me at bana.chiira@at4d.org. So join us, let's partner, and let's really make disability, inclusion, equity a reality in Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bernard, for joining us. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of AT Innovation and Impact Podcast. A special thanks to Bernard Chiira for joining us and sharing the incredible journey of Innovate Now. For more information about Innovate Now and to explore more stories of assistive technology in action, visit their website, atinnovatenow.com, and follow them on social media channels. Also, as Bernard mentioned, if you want to learn more about the new initiative, AT4D, please visit at4d.org. Join us next time as we continue to explore the groundbreaking innovations in assistive technology across Africa. Thank you.